David LaMore is the managing partner at White Cedar, an investor-backed search fund focused on vertical software. Prior to founding White Cedar, David worked in strategic finance and operations at Apple, where he worked on operational strategy, workforce planning, employee engagement, and data analytics projects. David holds an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business with honors, and a BS in applied economics and management from Cornell University, where he was a 4-year student athlete on the men's basketball team. He lives in Chicago, Illinois, with his wife, Sanchita. All right, David, let's dive right into it. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of the work that you're doing at White Cedar?
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for having me, Kane. White Cedar is what's known as an investor-backed search fund with the goal of acquiring just one business and then subsequently leading that one business as the day-to-day CEO over the long run. White Cedar has a focus specifically on B2B software and tech-enabled services. And it's typically going to be where we buy the company, me and my investors, in a situation where the business owner is typically a founder and looking for retirement and really values the legacy that they've built over their time, and is looking for a buyer that can take over that and grow upon that legacy over the long run. So a little bit different than, say, a traditional transaction where a private equity firm might totally disrupt the day-to-day operations and bring in a new management team, but also, some different priorities. And then also, compared to a competitor that may just be looking specifically for the customers, for the technology. Search fund is a situation that I'd say is much more people focused and focused really on the relationship between the searcher, i.e. myself, and the business owner who's looking to transition out and sell. With that, we're focused on healthy, growing companies, so no turnaround or distress situations, and really looking for a good product with some distinct competitive advantage, usually serving a very specific area of a particular industry vertical. So not, looking at these broad horizontal solutions, especially in the software space where some of the big players have so much share and really great products, to be frank.
When did you start your search?
At the end of March of 2022, I was currently wrapping up at Chicago Booth Business School and had launched the firm out of their private equity lab. And so it was a nice situation where I was able to supplement some coursework with the launch. So had some nice guidance with one of my lead investors, Next Coast ETA, and felt like hit the ground running. The search did look a little bit different when I started. It was a bit more of a generalist search, which is pretty common for lots of searchers. You might have a business services, healthcare services, and software directed search. And about 4 months into searching, I decided to completely focus my time on B2B software. And that was really where I was getting most traction with business owners as well. So it seemed to make sense at the time.
Do you follow, when you look at a search like that and you start to narrow down, are you I guess I'm asking, was the balance, okay, that's where my traction is, or how much did you weigh your interest? Are you actually interested in that side? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I thought about that quite a bit. And part of it was, just getting some feedback from the market and having conversations with business owners. And, as we moved into the second, third, fourth conversation, you start to realize that you may be running this thing if all goes well. And there were definitely some situations where I was having conversations and found myself thinking, I don't really want to see myself, or I don't see myself running this. And those businesses were typically in, more blue collar services, B2B services type industries where it's just, it didn't align with my interests as strongly as technology does. And I'm not a software engineer by background or anything like that, but have always been very keen to learn new technology. And I've always had, a deep amount of exposure to technology, especially coming from Apple, where I worked before business school. So there's always been this idea of, can I find a business where the economics and the business model makes sense, and they're providing a mission critical service to their customers, but also finding something that I'm going to wake up and enjoy doing every day, because that's a big part of it. This is not a short term decision to just buy and flip a company. This is something I want to do longer term. And so it was a big learning that I think evolved over the first few months of the search, definitely.
I mean, even since you left Booth, and I mean, there's been macroeconomic shifts just in that short period. Has the search reflected, or the difficulty of the search reflected, kind of what you're seeing?
Oh,
Macro.
absolutely. Yes. I was just looking at this the other day, and I don't know the specifics, but I think the 10-year treasury has 4x'd since I initially raised capital. And obviously all yields it really went up as central bank has increased rates. And that has directly impacted a lot of private equity activity in general. And specifically, I think at the lower market, where information and pricing does take a bit of time to trickle its way down. And so I'd say the big headline there is that the bid-ask spread, I guess you could say, between what I would be willing to offer and pay for a business versus seller expectations has still been pretty wide. It's narrowing, but it's been definitely the number one reason why we haven't made it, or I guess haven't had, those more serious talks with certain companies, just because the value isn't there for us. So it's been a challenge. I think, in aggregate, you can see for even larger funds, activities down something like 20, 30, maybe even 40%. So it's definitely a challenge, but I would say at the end of the day, there's going to be situations where business owners are looking to retire, and they're operating on a specific timeline and are reasonable with how much their businesses are worth. And I still see examples of that, and I think that's one of the beauties about the search fund model is we just need to find one, right? So we're not building out a portfolio of companies here. We don't kind of need all those factors to play perfectly for us to to generate a return, but just looking for one. And so while it has been the primary source of disqualifying a business owner from kind of going through our process, I'm still optimistic that despite the situation, we'll find something. And I expect things to probably stay higher for longer as well, so it's not going to be getting any better anytime soon. So you've got to adapt and just be more competitive, and really know your stuff when you get to those moments where the situation is right, the terms are fair, and you need to be ready to act when that time comes.
Interesting. Quick valuation question, because you touched on it. Excuse my ignorance around the ETA model, but are you looking at typically a valuation like as a multiple on EBITDA, or like is there other things that you're looking at?
Yeah, great question. It really depends, I would say, on various factors. Scalability and growth rate is a big one. And so where historically search fund transactions have been done on an EBITDA multiple, say kind of historically 4 to 6 times, that's probably north like 6 to 8 times now. I don't know the specifics there, but definitely under 8 times EBITDA for most kind of traditional services businesses, probably closer to that 5 or 6. With the increase of interest in technology-centric and software as a service business models, more and more have been trading at ARR multiples. And for searchers, that ARR multiple has been derived by a few different factors. So one is going to be the public markets and how cloud enterprise software companies are trading. Second will be on value of net revenue retention. So after a given year, kind of, net of downgrades and everything, how much are customers upgrading from a revenue standpoint, new customer growth, and then some stuff around churn. So when you factor in those four factors or four variables, most deals seem to be trading now between, and there aren't a ton, between 3 to 5 times ARR. Some may be a little bit lower, some a bit higher, but typically around that range. And they're not higher typically because if they were, the growth profile of the business would be much healthier, and that probably wouldn't make the search fund buyer as a good fit. They might be better for, that company might be better for a growth equity investment or getting acquired by a strategic. So it really is threading the needle. And a lot of the searchers' economics are contingent upon us performing and generating a specific return for investors. So it is something that we have to be mindful of to ensure that we don't pay too much for a business.
Yeah, that makes total sense. A bit of a switch here, a shift. Like you mentioned earlier, the idea that this isn't a short-term thing. I think that's an interesting thing from like a career standpoint. Considering your background, would you riff on that a little bit? Just the idea that, okay, you're going to commit to this for however long it's probably going to take to do the next thing, right? Whether that's an exit or whatever. Like, how did you kind of put that in your mind?
Yeah, it was through a lot of reflection and personal struggle before business school. I had worked in various different functional roles across Apple and Gap Inc. before that. And generally speaking, I'm just a very curious individual, and I think that's deeply reflected in my work experience. And I think what I realized very quickly once I graduated from college was that I am very competitive with myself and I'm always trying to, get better each and every day. And while the platforms of these big companies were great for me to learn, it got to a point where I wanted to move at a speed that was not in line with what it means to work at a larger company. And so, I was looking around at various different types of entrepreneurship and, activities, even while I was working in these large companies. And I think what I realized was that if I keep working at a big company, I'm going to need to kind of move on to the next thing every 2-3 years, because I have so many interests and I felt like I wasn't actually that great of an employee, to be fair. And before I decided to go to business school, I did make the commitment that whatever I'm doing, I'm going to commit to entrepreneurship as a long-term career path. And there is some risk associated to doing ETA. There is no guarantee that I'll find a business. Right now, the data shows that about 2/3 of searchers acquire a business that go out and raise a search fund, and about 3/4 of those that buy a business generate a non-negative return for their investors. So it's about a 50-50 shot of success. You gotta think of it that way. And so there is, the possibility that I don't buy a business. However, I'll just say that I think knowing that I made the commitment to entrepreneurship as a long-term career path, that gives me a lot of comfort and knowing that, I'm doing the right thing, regardless of the outcome. And I think I've developed a deep sense of gratitude and joy towards that, and there isn't that fear that I'm going to fail, because I know that this is going to be, something very long term for me until the day that I die. And I think the same approach I have for White Cedar, which is I'm looking to buy a business where I hope that or will do everything in my power to make sure that that's a good business. It's something that I'll have full enjoyment and commitment to running for the next 5+ years. Hopefully, closer to 10+ years. And I think that's where you can really gain a lot of great experience in seeing something through, and really challenge yourself to get out of your comfort zone and step into a position where you're really forcing yourself to make decisions that are very impactful.
That shift from being an employee and being like part of teams and things to doing this kind of solo search, like how has that been from just a mental standpoint? Like how have you managed to navigate that?
Yeah, it's interesting. My entire life has been, or has revolved around being in team environments. I played basketball growing up all the way through college, and even was playing at a very competitive level up until the pandemic. And playing on basketball teams, you've got diverse groups of individuals, all with different backgrounds, different personalities, but there's always this underlying sense of community. And with searching, it's totally different. I would say, fortunately, I am a more reserved individual. Like I don't carry around a large group of friends, and keep a pretty close circle around me. And having those strong, close relationships, although not many, has been a very good source of connection throughout the search. But I think what I've appreciated so much is, while I'm a solo searcher, there are many other searchers that are doing this by themselves, and I know many of them and catch up with some of them frequently. And there's a really great sense of community out of that, which I've really appreciated. I think the other thing too is, I when I started the search, I decided that I was going to launch Maverick, which was my Substack newsletter. And that had been an idea that I was always toying around with. When I was in San Francisco, I started writing just a diary, when I get off work and whatnot. And I found it to be very therapeutic and just getting out a lot of the ideas that I had in my mind, both good and bad. And I think that's been a huge source of comfort for me. On the one hand, I can really reflect on my experiences and put them or package them up in a way that can help other people. And then to see prospective searchers and current searchers use some of that to improve their own processes, and going through fundraising and other things that they're doing with their search, I get a lot of personal satisfaction out of that. So while it's so I think it just requires you to be very very in tune with the community, and also just leverage those relationships around you as much as you can, because this isn't just a solo thing. I've got lots of people around me, and that's not even factoring in my investors too, who are there to support me as questions come up.
Yeah, I mean, I've told you this offline, right? But I love what you're doing with the Maverick blog. I mean, you're right in that there are a lot of people that do ETA, but you become differentiated immediately through that blog, I think. So it's always fun to follow kind of what you're writing about there. No, absolutely. How do you mentioned earlier that a lot of this is thinking, okay, you get to a point where you're going to go, okay, I've got to run this business. I've got to run that team. How do you think about growing a team, and how do you think about, building a great one? Or what do you look for in a great one?
Yeah, my experiences heavily influenced by a few things. First is my basketball background. There's just so much that I've taken away, both good and bad, and what, makes a high performing team. I think my time at Apple was particularly transformative in how I thought about teams. And then also, just my general upbringing. I come from a blue collar family, and, seeing how those around me thought about family and teams, and even some of the organizations that family members work for, all that is, definitely shaped my thinking. And I've done quite a bit of reflection on this. When I think about growing a team, I think it really does start with identifying what culture you want and what's the value set associated to that culture. And then hiring individuals that fit and complement and enhance that culture in one way or the other. And that's, different for every leader. Everyone has their own culture, but I think for me, that's very, very important. I'm someone that is extremely values driven, and I try to build teams that reflect that. And is that right or wrong? I don't know. I'm not going to be the judge of that. But in terms of growing the team, I think it comes down to assessing what are the top priorities that the organization needs to solve for, and looking for people that are excited about solving that challenge and have the skill set to do so. And that might be specific domain expertise, and they've done that before. In, say, more of an entrepreneurial environment where things are a bit more ambiguous, that might just be the drive and the tenacity to get something done. And that is something that's very important for me to look through, is when even hiring intern candidates to work at White Cedar, I really look for potential drive, that intellectual curiosity, and an interest in just improvement, self-improvement. And a lot of that, boils down to just being a problem solver. And if someone shows that excitement to come in and solve problems, no matter, how sexy or not they might be, I find that to be really attractive, because from someone that I don't think of myself as very book smart, I think a lot of this stuff can be learned very quickly, and you just need to have the attitude to do so. You also asked about what I look for in a great team. In terms of the team structure itself, this is probably most taken from experiences in basketball and Apple. The first things first is that you need to create a psychologically safe environment. And I've been in environments that haven't been like that. If you are worried that you're going to say the wrong thing, or if you're sitting in the wrong place at the wrong time, then you're going to upset people. You can't get anything done. It doesn't matter. And I think there was some research through Google's either people analytics team or their people department that supported this. And for me, that's foundational to any great team, in a professional setting or sports. And then I think from there, it really does come down to, can we get everyone aligned on one single mission or goal? And that might be winning a championship. It might mean hitting next quarter's sales targets. It might mean finding and acquiring one great business. From there, it's about, I think, building and constructing a team that has diversity of thought and opinion and experiences. And you need to call on different players in different situations. And, it's okay if everyone doesn't want to be the star of the team. I've been in many situations where I've had to play that role, but in other times where I've had to step back and be the sixth man, or, more of a role player. And so understanding what everyone's role is quite important. And I think too, having a good bit of tension within the group, although grounded in that psychological safety, is important. So if you're comfortable with debate in a team, I think that's great. Some of the best outcomes in work settings have happened after some pretty intense discussions. You might even call them arguments, but they're grounded in respect, and I think that's really important. And then, on a more of a personal note, people need to feel like they're doing meaningful work, and that might mean something totally different for you than for me. And to some extent, people need to be able to pursue things outside of their day-to-day responsibilities to fulfill that need for meaningful work. And as someone who's, I think of myself as a pretty creative person, I think I'm trying to create avenues for people to unleash that creativity is very important to help them, break through the monotony of day-to-day work, but also, find more meaning in what they're doing. So yeah, I think there's a lot that goes into it, and teams need to be nurtured and challenged and managed very carefully, and there are times to be very hands-on while other times to be very hands-off. And I think for me, that's something I have a lot of work to do to figure out, but there's always ways to improve as a leader, I think.
If you were to pinpoint kind of the one maybe most challenging aspect of those for you personally, which one would it be, you think? Hopefully it wouldn't be the psychological safety, right? Like
yeah, it might even come into it a little bit, but I think where I'm very competitive, and trying to understand when to pull back at times with teams that I'm leading to ensure that I'm being respectful and aware of everyone's situation, because there can be a point where you just try to push people without pulling back, and you can break teams or break that trust. I think that's one element. And I think especially with the search fund, where I'm required to manage so many different processes and functions and stakeholders, I think saving that time for meaningful, like flow work, you might call it, is very important. And the times that I've been able to successfully block out parts of my day to do that, I think some of the best changes or work outputs have come from that. So I'd say those are going to be the big things, and it'll obviously change if I'm to acquire a business, and I think it'll be largely of transitioning the trust from the business owner to me, and it's going to take a lot of time throughout the first year, especially, to build back up the trust of employees, because any sort of transaction, such as a search fund buyout, is going to be a big change for the employees of the company, and so for me, doing everything that I can, demonstrating that I truly live by these values, and I wouldn't ask someone else of the team to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And so really showing by leading in front.
Make a really interesting point there, and which raised like a side question, which is there a geographical kind of limit to what you're doing in terms of the search? Because I imagine your leadership style probably means that you want to be on site all the time.
Yeah. It's interesting with software businesses. I've found that many that I have conversations with the founders, the businesses have moved into almost all remote workforces, which obviously have their pros and cons. There are some hybrid environments that I've come across, but I don't have a strong geographic filter on where I'm searching, and I do really value in-person presence. Hopefully there's a day we can do another podcast where we're both in the same room, because That's the kind of stuff that I always come back to think of where I've really developed really good relationships with people. And I think that's definitely part of my, operating philosophy or leadership philosophy, is having that in-person connection. And I think what's challenging is that not everyone's that way anymore, especially since the pandemic. And so what ways can you provide that level of flexibility of, in-person, engagement, while giving them the autonomy that they need to get their work done on their own terms? I was just talking with a founder a few weeks ago, and they had chosen Monday, Tuesday, Thursday to be in the office each week. And part of it was economically driven. It was like one of the cheapest rates they could get their co-working space for. But also it was, about ensuring that everyone was kind of in the same team, or everyone was in the office at the same time, but also respecting them and saying, all right, we're not going to say come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so we don't, signal that we don't trust you to be working on those days. So you have to, I think, really learn the needs of the workforce and then try to design, a program that meets to that. I know it's a bit of a digression, but it's a very tricky topic, I think, given how much, I do value that in-person engagement.
I mean, the work that we do is a lot around stuff like this, with employer brands and employee engagement and stuff, and the mentality shift across the labor force since the pandemic. It's been like profound to a level that, like, you can't even fathom the shift. Getting people back into the office, things like that, it's been so, like, such an interesting challenge for so many people.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, hearing you reflect on it is super interesting. Second to last question then, David, what's been the best, most rewarding part of this process for you so far?
That's a great question. I think, before I went to business school, there was a lot of, struggles on my own end, both personally and professionally. Just, I think trying to identify meaningful work in my own sense and how I was going to go out and do that. And business school, was an avenue to go in and really explore that further and make a decision. And fortunately, I think the biggest thing that I've taken away from this experience so far has been that I have really enjoyed entrepreneurship and being a searcher. And you'd be surprised, a lot of searchers don't like doing this. It's just a means to buying a business, and then that's where they really find enjoyment. I think for me, I've taken a lot out of going through this process, really having to figure out so many different things without having any experience, and really leaning on, my instincts on a lot of this stuff. But also, I think it's helped me realize how much, sales is involved in so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, everything from recruiting interns to trying to recruit a business owner to sell to me is all about sales. And I think that's a lesson that, is so valuable, and something that, I'll take with me after this experience for sure.
Wonderful. Where would you like people to go? Where can they find you, David?
I just deleted my Instagram, so just on LinkedIn and Substack. I'd say, I'm pretty inactive on LinkedIn, but Substack, I do keep posting every other week, and I'm looking at ways to build this out over the long run to help entrepreneurs in various formats, whether it be searchers or people looking to start up their first company. So follow me on Substack. I think the link is maverickbydavid.substack.com. And give it a look. Happy to take in any feedback that people have, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, wonderful. No, I can definitely vouch for the Substack. It's a really good resource for anybody looking for stuff. Okay, great. Thanks, David. Thanks for being so candid.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Kane. This has been great. Hopefully we can do this again in the future.
David LaMore is the managing partner at White Cedar, an investor-backed search fund focused on vertical software. Prior to founding White Cedar, David worked in strategic finance and operations at Apple, where he worked on operational strategy, workforce planning, employee engagement, and data analytics projects. David holds an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business with honors, and a BS in applied economics and management from Cornell University, where he was a 4-year student athlete on the men's basketball team. He lives in Chicago, Illinois, with his wife, Sanchita.